We're going to be discussing Cisco's WebVPN. It's a pretty cool VPN solution that we call a thin VPN or a clientless VPN. Effectively, we're able to provide our secure network resources to end users without making them do a lot of configuration on their devices or install other software. So what it allows us really to do is we have a remote access VPN tunnel to the security appliance, and they hit that via the web browser. After they hit the web interface, we can provide a range of different services that we might have internally to them. And specifically, the WebVPN from Cisco supports internal websites, web apps, NT and Active Directory file shares, email proxies, so POP3, IMAP, SMTP. We can do MS Outlook access, and all sorts of kind of other smaller TCP-based applications as well. So it's secured by SSL, and hopefully now that we're kind of past the issues with SSL, we're going to be trying to use TLS. Just to make the point here that Packet Tracer does not support the TLS implementation. So when we go through this config, we will actually still be using SSL for that. Basically, it's all just SSL encrypted, so it's all kind of stemming from that central site there. So let's take a look at the diagram that I've got out here, and I'll kind of walk through what's configured and what we still have remaining. So I'm simulating this internet user. So they're on a public IP address. It could be someone coming in from their own ISP. For the sake of simplicity, I've just took that laptop up directly to ETH00, which is my outside interface on the ASA. So those two should have their IP addresses configured. It looks like they do. We'll have to set up the ASA from scratch basically, so this will be the network scheme that we use. On the other side, the internal network, we're going to be using this Web01 server. And just to double check here, that does have its IP address configured. And all we're going to try to do is just serve a simple web page through this web VPN. So as we can see, we have the HTTP service on and all of the different pages that it has for that. So let's get right into the basic configuration that we're going to need to do for the ASA. And after we get the IP addresses configured, we'll then go do the web VPN setup as well. So from the ASA, we can jump right on here. And of course, no password. It's a blank install right now. And we can just kind of start marching through this configuration. So for the inside interface, let's quick do a show IP address and just kind of see what's set up right now. Our VLAN 1, being the inside VLAN, already has the 192.168.1.1 IP address and the slant 24 subnet mask. So there should be nothing to do there. But as you can see on VLAN 2 here on the outside, we don't have any IP addresses set. So from config T, I'm going to go to interface VLAN 2, and we'll just set up the IP address of 138.247.80.1, and I made this network a slant 30, so 255.255.255.252, and we should be set up there. So let's do an end. And there you can see we've got our IP addresses set up correctly. So simple test, let's just make sure we can actually communicate here. So I'm just going to ping the web server, and all is well. Perfect. So not a whole lot to do really once you have your interfaces set up. What we're going to go through next is kind of a lot of different steps that are sort of intertwined. So unfortunately, it's not going to be a very clear each step of the way, but you'll kind of see how this looks at the end when we come back and look at the configuration. But what we're going to do is we're going to set up the web VPN. We're going to enable it on the outside interface so our external clients can come into our network and hit those resources that they need. And we'll kind of configure some different things that'll help us manage a larger group of users. So we'll create group policies so we can apply the same links and the same rules to a multiple number of users without having to configure each user individually. So we can kind of start down that rabbit hole here. We'll jump right into the config T, and the web VPN configuration is pretty simple. So all we really do is web VPN. We drop into the web VPN configuration, and we'll do enable. We're going to enable this on the outside interface. So enable outside. Okay, so So it just says VPN and DTLS are enabled on the outside. Now, other things that you might want to do if you're in the WebVPN, and I don't believe it's in Packet Tracer, no it's not, is we can actually change the port that this is listening on. Generally speaking, you're going to want to leave it on port 443, so when your users hit your company portal or whatever it might be, they don't have to worry about it. The reason I bring this up is if you're also using the ASDM, which is the Cisco's Web Management Interface, that also wants to use port 443. So you can't have two things listening on the same port. What most administrators will do is they'll move the ASDM part of it, so the management part of it, off to a different port and let their users hit 443. It's a little bit more simple for them. So WebVPN is enabled. What we're going to do next is work with our LAN network. So I need to define the subnet of my inside network, and I also need to set up NAT for it so we can actually have that traffic passing in and out of this. So I'm going to create a object. It's one of our things that we see in firewalls a lot, is actually using objects rather than typing out the full network mask and all of that every time. So I'm going to say object network, and you can just give it a name. I'm going to choose the name of LAN. And you can see some of the things that we add into this. I need to say what subnet identifies the LAN subnet. So if we look back at my diagram, what we're using here is the 192.168.1.0 subnet. So that's the network ID. And then of course we need to do the subnet mask as well. And now anytime I reference the word LAN in my configuration, it's going to tie back to the subnet. Let's also tell it that we should be using NAT for this as well. So I'm going to say we're going to do NAT. We're going to start on the inside and map it to the outside IP address. And we're going to set it up as a dynamic NAT tied to the interface. So NAT inside outside, dynamic interface. So working through the config, we've pretty much done all we need to do with the object network LAN. We've enabled the WebVPN. Now we need to define what users and what links can they have access to and what groups do we want to exist here. So we're going to start out with the group policy configuration here so we can manage a bunch of users as one single entity. So I'm going to exit out of the config network object, and we're going to go into config T again and do group policy. So group policy, we're going to give it a name just to keep things simple. This is not a great name. I'm going to call it group 1. You might choose something more meaningful like engineers, sales, telecommuters, whatever it might be. Just have a better name than group 1. And this is an internal group. What this means is that this group policy exists only on the ASA firewall. You can tie group policies back to Active Directory, but that's going to be beyond the scope of what we're looking at here. So it's an internal group policy. So we've created the policy with that previous command, and now we need to set the attributes. So we'll go into group policy attributes, and there's really not a whole lot that we need to do in here. We need to set up what protocol this WebVPN is going to use to secure itself. So we're going to go VPN tunnel protocol, and as we can see here, we only have SSL clientless. Okay, so we're using SSL to protect connections of the incoming connections to that firewall. The next thing that we need to do is enable the WebVPN. So we're going to drop into the WebVPN. And what it's looking for in this section is the URL list. Now we haven't defined any URLs. When a user connects into this web page, what are they going to see as far as links to my internal resources? Before we go a step further, let's actually go configure that. So I'm going to minimize this and jump into the firewall. We're going to go to the config section and go to the bookmark manager. Now this is something you would normally do through the ASDM interface. Since that does not exist in Packet Tracer, they've given us this little bookmark manager page here. Functionally, it's almost identical. The point being here though that we have to do this through the web. The reason we can't do it through the command line is when we're actually editing these bookmarks, it's creating a large XML list on the firewall. So rather than us having to type out a bunch of XML, they prefer you just do it all through the web interfaces. So I'm going to create a bookmark title. I'm just going to pick a name, Site 1. This might be your internal portal. It might be something for like your company's firm. It could be policies, HR, whatever it might be. What's the URL that you're putting in going to be labeled as? So I'm going to point this into my internal web server at 192.168.1.10, and we'll add that in. So very simple, like I said, this is almost identical to how the ASDM works. So we'll minimize that, go back to our firewalls config, and now we can add that to the URL list. So we'll do a URL list. Sorry, we need to go back to WebVPN. I was curious why that command was not found. Now we can do the URL list. We'll set up the value, and what we put in for the value is what we called the site. So I just chose site 1. Okay, so any member of this group policy 1 group will see site 1 in their list when they connect to the VPN. This gets pretty cool when you have different teams of people that need different levels of access to resources. We can just define those lists as URL lists, and they're kind of stuck to what we give them. So that's it for the group policy. Let's back out, and last thing we need to do is create an actual user and then put them into that policy. So I'm going to create a username of Mike, and I'm just going to choose a not very good password for now of Cisco. Of course, right, production, I keep saying this, but we want to choose good passwords for that stuff, especially if we're giving access to protected internal resources. So there's my user account. We're going to change their attributes. And this is where we get to assign them to the VPN group policy. So we'll do a VPN group policy. This is group 1. And there we have it. That should be it. Let's take a quick look and make sure our user can actually see this. And we'll go back and quick run through that config as well. So now the way this works is that the internet user, this could be your telecommuter, this could be anybody outside your network, is going to type in the IP address of your firewall, and they should be prompted for a VPN login. Now keep in mind this is happening entirely through the browser, so support for it's going to be really, really good. We don't have additional software requirements. So my firewall's at 138.247.80.1, and we need HTTPS. Okay, so there's our authorization. This is where I enter in the account I just made, so Mike and Cisco. And we get brought to the clientless VPN portal. Now on the real firewalls, you can actually go in and customize these, so you can put your company logo on it, you can change the colors, you can really make this a pretty nice looking landing page for all of your remote workers. What we see and what we care about so far though is the URL list over here, and you can see site 1. When I click on that, it should redirect me to the internal web server and show me that web page. This is very cool stuff. There's no need to do a bunch of crazy NAT forwarding. We're limiting users to what they can access internally. They have to have another layer of security because it's that VPN account. It's pretty cool stuff to give them this clientless VPN as a really easy to use option. So now that we've verified that's working, right, we could browse to the other pages within that web server. Right, you can see the web page is functioning, everything is just happening over this VPN portal page. So last thing I wanted to show you again was the configuration of the firewall, and just kind of briefly browse through that so you can see everything as it's put together. And we'll kind of step through it. So we had our outside interface was in VLAN 2, and remember the firewall actually splits these in half, so half our interfaces were in the inside VLAN, half of them were in the outside. We just did IP addresses on the inside and outside VLANs, left the default security levels. We enabled the WebVPN for any ports connected to the outside VLAN, and we defined our LAN subnet as 192.168.1.0. The reason we did this was going to be a little bit easier to set up our NAT, which came next, because we still need a translation from the public IP address back to that web server's internal IP address. So it has to be routable somehow. After that, there wasn't a whole lot happening. We created a group policy so we could have a bunch of different users that would get the same set of URLs. So we created the group policy, we told them that we're going to use SSL to protect them, and in the WebVPN, the only site that they have access to is site 1. After that, I created the user account and added that user to that VPN group policy. Not a whole lot to it, but it's a pretty cool configuration once we have it all set up.